The New York session is going to be highly volatile today. On the one hand, investors are inspired by upbeat corporate records. On the other hand, they could be discouraged by mixed macroeconomic data, worldwide inflation, and the US dollar's rally. Besides, they are digesting Tesla's corporate report. And let's discuss trends in the US financial markets, bearing in mind these factors. As our analysts expected, the benchmark stock indexes extended their gains on a Tuesday, and the stock market completed another volatile session, and the indexes lost the gains of the mid-session. The Dow Jones grew 1.12% intraday, and the Nasdaq closed with a modest growth of 0.9%. The S&P 500 rose 1.14% to close at 3,720 points. However, the major stock indexes traded in the red in the New York pre-market today. All three indexes signaled a pessimistic opening. The S&P 500 is expected to trade in the white intraday corridor between 3,600 and 3,790 points. Investors seem to be confused. They are still unnerved by high inflation and the hawkish Federal Reserve. Corporate reports cannot outweigh fears. The S&P 500 has already jumped by 6.5% from the intraday low of the last week. However, cautions investors have already witnessed two similar spikes in 2022 and are hesitant to make optimistic conclusions. Nevertheless, upbeat corporate reports improved market sentiment. For example, Wall Street perked up in the light of a strong corporate profit reports by Goldman Sachs and the Johnson & Johnson, despite concerns about the further aggressive rate hikes by the Fed Reserve. Investors also found cases for optimism on a Wednesday. In spite of upbeat fresh corporate records, investors are in the wait-and-see mood. Red-hot inflation data for the UK and the EU are on investors' radars today. The strong data revived the interest in the safe haven assets. On the plus side, Tesla and IBM reported on a solid corporate profits. Netflix is setting the tone on Wall Street today. Its stock surged by 14% in the pre-market because the company's profit in the third quarter was beyond Wall Street's forecasts. Netflix added 2.4 million subscribers around the world, twice bigger than expected. The streaming giant reported that its revenue increased by 5.9%, but high operational spending cut the net profit by 3.5%. Nasdaq also unveiled its corporate earnings. The stock exchange reported that its revised profit grew 15% in the third quarter because of the high demand for investment products. Retailer Procter & Gamble also reported higher than expected quarterly sales. The shares rose 2% in the pre-market. By and large, the stock market is weighed down by inflation fears despite upbeat corporate reports. The Fed is due to publish the Beige Book tonight. However, the Tesla report could become the market catalyst today. Amid expectations, the stocks of the companies with a mega capitalization such as Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta traded mixed in the New York pre-market. So traders have revised the sentiment in the currency market. The US dollar is regaining its footing, attracting traders as a safe haven. The US dollar index is likely to trade in the intraday corridor between 112.50 and 113.20. The penny factor of the US dollar strength is the UK inflation data. The annual CPI gain jumped by more than 10% in September, the 40-year high as in July. Moreover, the EU CPI also surged to 9.9% from 9.1% in the previous months. In this context, the euro and the sterling plunged against the US dollar, which has already revived from the US inflation shock and again is fed by hawkish remarks from the Fed's policymakers. In the latest remarks, Anil Kashkari stated that the central bank would have to raise the federal funds rate above 4.75% if inflation keeps on accelerating. Today, market participants will digest a speech by Charles Evans and the Fed's budget book. The red-hot data on the U.S. construction sector proved the health of the U.S. economy. Building permits in the United States shed light on the further trends in the construction sector. Building permits grew 1.4% on months. Housing starts in the U.S. contracted 8.1% in September. The U.S. housing market was hurt by a rapid increase in the prices of building materials and high mortgage rates, which have recently climbed to the strongest level since 2002. The USD CAD is again hidden for 1.38. A recovery of oil prices and the fresh Canadian CPI is given the loonie helping rally. So the loonie is able to stay afloat, unlike the euro and the sterling. The intraday corridor for the USD CAD is seen between 1.3740 and 1.3820. Inflation seems to loosen its grip in Canada. The annual rate of Canada's inflation inched down to 6.9% in September from 7% in August, an uptick higher than the expected 6.8%. The index has been easing for the third month straight, having printed a 39-year peak in June. Despite a decline for the third month, inflation in Canada is still way above the target level of 2%. On top of that, it has been slowing down not as rapidly as analysts predicted. In turn, the Bank of Canada has the excuse for further sharp rate hikes. Meanwhile, the crypto market is displaying its opposite correlation with the US dollar index, so the market lost its impetus on a Tuesday. And today, Bitcoin is trading lower again. The token has been locked in a narrow range. Although it's drifting lower, the price remains above $19,000. Market sentiment has turned sour. Altcoins are also losing ground. The second largest cryptocurrency, Ethereum, dipped below the landmark level of $1,300 with bearish prospects. Solana, Ripple, and Litecoin are trading in the red. The intraday outlook for Bitcoin depends on Tesla corporate report. If the stock market does not reverse upwards after the report, the flagship crypto will remain trapped in a narrow range between $18,900 and $19,400. If the high-tech stocks rally tonight, Bitcoin could move in a wider range between $18,200 and $20,100. The pre-market signals another gloomy session on a Wednesday, but some events might change sentiment later today. Trade with the profits and see you tomorrow.